The coroner wrote a single word on the certificate: accident. A gun discharged during a private hunt on a frosted November morning in 1899. The victim was a railroad heir worth nearly $20 million, found face down in leaves beside his own estate. His widow wore black silk and told reporters it was a tragic misfire. Servants whispered about an argument the night before. The newspapers printed condolences and moved on. But within a decade, 3 more deaths would orbit the same drawing rooms, each sealed with money, silence, and influence. The question was never who pulled the trigger. It was who paid to make it disappear. Chapter 1: The Fortune That Bought Silence. Before the first body fell, the family fortune had already purchased judges, senators, and entire blocks of Manhattan real estate. The Vanderbilts controlled railroads. The Astors owned half of New York. The Carnegies shaped steel into skylines. Between 1870 and 1900, a handful of American families accumulated wealth that defied comprehension. They did not simply earn money. They engineered monopolies, crushed competitors, and rewrote the rules of commerce itself. By 1890, Cornelius Vanderbilt's estate approached $100 million. That sum represented more than the entire federal budget of 1830. One man held more capital than the government had possessed during Andrew Jackson's presidency. The mathematics of inequality carved deep trenches through society. A factory worker in Pittsburgh earned roughly $400 per year. He worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days each week, breathing coal dust and molten metal vapors. His wife stretched that salary across rent, food, and the constant threat of injury without compensation. Meanwhile, William K. Vanderbilt spent $5 million constructing a single summer cottage in Newport. The mansion required 4 years to build. Imported marble arrived from Italy. Bronze fixtures were cast in France. The ballroom ceiling rose 40 feet and could accommodate 400 guests beneath chandeliers holding 300 candles each. The scale of excess became its own form of power. These families did not merely inhabit wealth, they weaponized it. Political campaigns required funding, and industrialists supplied that currency with expectations attached. In the 1880 election, railroad magnates contributed over $2 million to candidates who promised favorable legislation. Senators received retainers as legal consultants, a polite term for legalized bribery. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone employed more than 20 sitting legislators as paid advisors. When votes arrived on freight regulations or labor protections, those senators knew which side employed them. Newspapers operated under similar influence. Advertising revenue flowed from department stores and shipping companies owned by the same elite families. Editors understood that scandal sold papers, but severed business relationships sold nothing. A critical exposé might boost circulation for 1 week. A withdrawn advertising contract meant bankruptcy within 3 months. Most publishers chose survival. When controversy touched a prominent family, coverage remained respectful. Euphemisms replaced accusations. Private matters stayed private. The estates themselves stood as monuments to this concentrated power. They occupied thousands of acres, surrounded by stone walls and iron gates. Servants numbered in the dozens. A typical mansion required 20 to 50 staff members for daily operations. Cooks, maids, groundskeepers, stable hands, footmen, and personal secretaries. Each employee signed contracts that included strict confidentiality clauses. Gossip meant immediate dismissal without references. Testimony in legal matters triggered social exile and unemployability. Silence became a job requirement. The hunting preserves stretched across 500 to 1,000 acres of private woodland. No public roads crossed these lands. No local sheriffs patrolled them. What happened within those boundaries remained invisible to outside authority. Gamekeepers reported to estate managers, not municipal police. If an accident occurred during a hunt, the family controlled every witness, every report, and every official who might investigate. Jurisdiction itself bent around wealth. By 1895, the wealthiest 1% of Americans controlled nearly 50% of the nation's total wealth. The gap had never been wider. The Gilded Age earned its name from the thin layer of gold covering deep structural rot. Beneath the glittering surface, labor riots erupted in Chicago and Pittsburgh. As strikes turned violent when corporations hired private militias, state governments deployed troops to break unions. The system protected capital, not workers. Courts ruled consistently in favor of ownership. Judges who defied corporate interests found themselves isolated, their rulings overturned by appellate courts staffed with sympathetic colleagues. Legal firms became instruments of this power. Elite attorneys charged retainers exceeding $20,000 per year, equivalent to 50 years of factory wages. They did not merely defend clients. They shaped legislation, influenced judicial appointments, and orchestrated delays that exhausted opponents' resources. A working-class plaintiff might wait 5 years for a trial date, while legal fees consumed any potential settlement. The wealthy defendant simply paid attorneys to file motions, request continuances, and outlast the opposition. Justice belonged to those who could afford to wait. This machinery hummed invisibly beneath society's elegant surface. At charity galas and opera openings, industrialists shook hands with mayors and governors. They discussed art and literature, while private agreements formed in brief asides. A judgeship needed filling. A railroad expansion required permits. These conversations occurred between champagne toasts, sealed with nods rather than signatures. No bribery occurred in any legal sense. Just understandings between gentlemen. The question hung unspoken in every transaction. When money can fund campaigns and newspapers, when estates employ more people than small towns, when legal teams outnumber prosecutors 10 to 1, what cannot it buy? The answer emerged slowly, reluctantly, only when bodies began to fall and silence proved insufficient. The fortune was already complete when the first death arrived. The machinery stood ready. In all that remained was testing whether wealth could shield murder as effectively as it shielded monopoly. Chapter 2. When Society Closed Ranks. In the ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers, scandal was handled with handshakes, not handcuffs. The unwritten code governed everything. Society operated as a closed system, a fortress constructed from shared interest and mutual protection. Membership required birth, marriage, or exceptional wealth paired with decades of careful behavior. Exclusion meant erasure. No invitations arrived. No business partnerships formed. Daughters found no suitable husbands. Sons discovered that clubs maintained waiting lists lasting lifetimes. Mrs. Caroline Astor controlled access to New York's highest circles. Her ballroom held exactly 400 people, a number that became synonymous with social legitimacy. The 400. Those outside this group might possess millions, but they remained nouveau riche, forever tainted by the smell of recent money. Those inside enjoyed protection that extended far beyond party invitations. When one family faced scandal, the others formed a wall. The mechanism functioned with practiced efficiency. Private investigators worked for prominent families long before police departments existed. These detectives operated outside legal constraints. They followed rivals, documented indiscretions, and gathered leverage. When necessary, they manufactured evidence: a compromising photograph, a forged letter, a bribed witness willing to swear to anything for $200. These tools stayed locked away until needed: insurance policies against future threats. Settlements occurred in mahogany-paneled offices, far from courtrooms. Attorneys negotiated terms over brandy and cigars. A young woman claimed assault by a railroad heir. The family offered $5,000 and a train ticket to California. She signed documents promising eternal silence. If she spoke afterward, the agreement included penalties exceeding $100,000, an impossible sum that guaranteed compliance. Most accepted. Those who refused faced coordinated destruction. Newspapers published accusations about their character. Employers received anonymous letters. Bank loans disappeared. Society crushed dissenters systematically. Club membership provided another layer of protection. The Metropolitan Club, the Union League, the Knickerbocker. These institutions functioned as fortresses of influence. Members included judges, prosecutors, and police commissioners. When legal trouble touched one member, others intervened quietly. A prosecutor discovered his appointment owed much to club connections. A judge remembered he wished his son to marry into a particular family. These obligations required no explicit statement. Everyone understood the currency of favor. Marriages formed strategic alliances more than romantic unions. The European aristocrats offered titles. American heiresses provided capital. The Duke of Marlborough received $2.5 million to marry Consuelo Vanderbilt. She received a coronet and escaped from New York society. The marriage contract included terms that protected Marlborough's estate from her potential divorce claims. Every detail was negotiated like a corporate merger. Love remained optional. Bloodline preservation and capital protection were mandatory. The press cooperated through financial dependency and social aspiration. Society reporters attended the same parties as their subjects. They danced in the same ballrooms, ate at the same tables. Harsh coverage meant immediate exclusion. Favorable articles earned continued access and occasional gifts. A reporter who praised Mrs. Vanderbilt's gown might receive an expensive scarf at Christmas. One who questioned her husband's business practices would never enter that mansion again. Blacklisting extended beyond social functions into economic life. Banks refused loans to families marked as outsiders. Suppliers raised prices or claimed shortages. Business contracts evaporated. A man might own a successful factory, but find himself unable to expand because no bank would approve his applications. The reasons remained unspoken. Credit committees simply determined he represented excessive risk. The real risk was challenging someone more powerful. Retainers kept the best attorneys permanently employed. Major families paid $50,000 to $200,000 annually to legal firms, ensuring those lawyers could never represent opponents. This strategy removed the most competent opposition before cases began. When scandal threatened, the family already employed every attorney worth hiring. Potential plaintiffs faced smaller firms with fewer resources and no connections. The outcome was predetermined. Medical examiners and coroners operated within this system too. Many held their positions through political appointment, and political appointments flowed from campaign contributions. When a body required examination, The coroner understood the implications. His report determined whether an investigation proceeded or stopped cold. A ruling of natural causes or accidental death closed the matter instantly. Evidence disappeared, witnesses scattered, the machinery of justice never engaged. Grand juries drew members from property-holding voters, meaning the wealthy and their dependents. A jury of peers, in practical terms, meant a jury of social equals. Working men rarely served. When they did, they sat beside businessmen and lawyers who understood the unstated rules. Deliberations occurred in rooms where some jurors owned stock in companies controlled by the accused. Others attended the same church or belonged to the same clubs. Indictments required unanimity or strong majorities. A single sympathetic juror could block prosecution indefinitely. The code extended to servants, who formed another class of controlled witnesses. Domestic staff saw everything. They heard arguments, noticed injuries, delivered suspicious packages. But their testimony held little weight against employer statements. Courts assumed servants lied for attention or revenge. More practically, speaking against an employer guaranteed unemployability. The domestic service network operated through references. One bad reference meant never working in a respectable home again. Silence purchased future employment. Truth purchased poverty. When all these mechanisms aligned, scandal simply evaporated. A suspicious death became a tragic accident. An assault became a misunderstanding. A theft became a bookkeeping error. The system processed controversy into acceptable narrative, protecting the fortress from within and without. The first ominous sign arrived when loyalty to class began outweighing loyalty to truth in matters of life and death. Financial impropriety was one thing. Murder was another. But the machinery, once constructed, did not distinguish between protecting a tax fraud and shielding a killer. The same tools worked equally well for both. No one questioned whether the system would activate when death arrived. Everyone knew it would. The only question was whether it would hold. Chapter 3. The estate that hid everything. The mansion rose with 100 rooms, imported marble, and corridors long enough to swallow a scream. Construction began in 1892 and consumed 4 years. The final cost reached $6 million, a sum that could have built 300 modest homes for working families. Architects traveled from Paris with portfolios of French chateau designs. Stonemasons carved Indiana limestone into classical facades. Italian craftsmen installed marble fireplaces in 48 rooms. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, topped by a stained glass ceiling that bathed everything in colored light. A grand staircase swept upward in a curve of polished mahogany, each step cut from a single tree that had lived 2 centuries before falling to the estate's ambition. The property sprawled across 800 acres of formerly agricultural land. Previous owners had farmed wheat and raised dairy cattle. The new family cleared fields, planted ornamental gardens, and imported full-grown trees from Europe. Landscape designers reshaped hills and redirected a creek to form decorative ponds. The main approach stretched for half a mile, lined with elm trees that would take 20 years to mature into the intended canopy. Patience meant nothing to those who could afford to plant forests. Inside, the rooms flowed into one another like a maze designed by wealth. The library held 12,000 volumes, and many purchased by the shelf-foot for decorative uniformity rather than reading. The music room contained a pipe organ with 2,000 individual pipes. The dining room seated 40 guests beneath a chandelier weighing 800 pounds. Service hallways ran behind walls, allowing staff to move invisibly between rooms. Servants used separate staircases, entering and exiting without disturbing the family's awareness. The mansion functioned as two buildings occupying the same space, one for display, one for labor. 52 servants maintained this monument. 12 worked in the kitchen alone: cooks, assistant cooks, pastry chefs, and scullery maids who scrubbed pots until their hands bled. 8 chambermaids cleaned bedrooms and changed linens daily. 6 footmen served meals, carried luggage, and stood at attention during gatherings. 10 groundskeepers tended gardens, mowed lawns, and maintained the greenhouse where orchids bloomed year-round. The head butler managed this human machinery, ensuring everything operated with invisible precision. Each servant earned between $150 and $300 annually, plus room and board in the attic quarters. Those rooms held narrow beds, shared wash basins, and little privacy. Staff worked 6 days weekly, from dawn until the family retired. Sundays offered half days off, insufficient time to travel anywhere beyond the estate gates. This isolation was intentional. Servants who never left could not gossip in town. Information stayed trapped within the property boundaries. The hunting preserve occupied 500 acres of dense woodland at the property's northern edge. Paths wound through oak and maple forests, deliberately maintained in semi-wild condition. Deer, pheasant, and grouse thrived under careful game management. A stone lodge stood 2 miles from the main house, equipped with trophy rooms displaying mounted heads and gun racks holding rifles worth more than a servant's annual wage. Hunts occurred monthly during season, exclusive gatherings where business deals formed between shots. Those woods held secrets geography made easier to keep. Thick undergrowth obscured sightlines beyond 30 feet, sound dampened in foliage. The nearest public road ran 3 miles distant. Estate boundaries were marked with stone walls and no trespassing signs backed by private security. 2 gamekeepers patrolled daily, armed and authorized to remove intruders immediately. Local sheriffs respected property lines. Jurisdiction ended at the gates unless explicitly invited inside. The estate's peak arrived in November 1898, a gala marking the family's ascension into the highest social tier. 400 guests received engraved invitations on heavy cardstock. They arrived in carriages that stretched along the drive for an hour. Women wore gowns worth thousands of dollars, jewelry borrowed from bank vaults for the evening. Men arrived in white tie, their fortunes combined exceeding the gross domestic product of small nations. The ballroom glittered under electric lights, a modern marvel most homes still lacked. An orchestra played waltzes while servants circulated with champagne imported from France. Dinner featured 12 courses: oysters, consommé, filet of sole, lamb chops, duck, sorbet, roasted quail, salad, cheese, dessert, fruit, and coffee. Each course arrived on china trimmed with gold. Crystal goblets caught light like trapped stars. The meal cost $50 per person, equal to 2 months' wages for those serving it. Conversations floated through the rooms, light and meaningless. Business never appeared explicitly, but alliances formed in glances and subtle nods. A railroad merger received unspoken approval. A political candidate gained financial backing through a handshake. These people controlled industries, legislation, and the machinery of American expansion. They stood at the absolute center of power, convinced their position was permanent. The host moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations on the estate's magnificence. He wore confidence like his tailored suit, perfectly fitted and utterly assured. His wife sparkled in diamonds that had once belonged to French royalty. Their children, dressed in miniature versions of adult fashion, appeared briefly before nurses escorted them back to the nursery. The display was complete. The family seemed untouchable, wrapped in marble and money, protected by walls that kept the world at a comfortable distance. No one noticed the shadows lengthening in corners. No one considered that walls which kept others out might also trap those inside. The estate had been built as a fortress. But fortresses have always served two purposes: keeping enemies outside and keeping secrets within. The party ended near dawn. Guests departed into the November cold, carriages crunching over gravel drives. Servants cleared tables and extinguished lights. The mansion fell silent except for the settling sounds old houses make. Everything appeared triumphant. The peak had been reached. But peaks have only one direction left to go. And in the woods beyond the garden lights, a winter was closing in with the patience of something that knows how to wait. Chapter 4: A Hunting Accident. No one saw. Only 2 men entered the woods that morning, and only one walked back to the carriage. November 17th, 1899. The temperature hovered just above freezing. Frost coated grass and turned the ground hard beneath fallen leaves. The sun rose late and weak, filtering through bare branches. Conditions were ideal for hunting. Deer moved in cold weather, and visibility improved with leaves down. The 2 men departed the main house at 7 in the morning, carrying rifles and wearing heavy wool coats. One was the family heir, 29 years old, worth an estimated $20 million through inheritance and investments. He controlled railroad stock, mining operations, and Manhattan real estate that generated income exceeding $5,000 daily. His photograph appeared regularly in society pages. His wedding 3 years earlier had occupied front-page coverage in 6 newspapers. His wife had given him 2 children. His future extended forward like the railroad tracks his grandfather had laid across the continent. The other was a business associate, younger by 5 years, less wealthy by orders of magnitude. He managed a lumber company that supplied railroad ties, a relationship that made him useful but not equal. His invitation to the estate hunting party represented social climbing. He came when called and left when dismissed. They entered the woods at 7:15. The head gamekeeper saw them depart but did not accompany them as requested. The heir preferred private hunts with business contacts. Strategy discussions occurred more freely without servants overhearing. The men carried Winchester rifles, .30 caliber, accurate to 300 yards in competent hands. Both had hunted since childhood. Familiarity with firearms was not questioned. At 9:30, a single gunshot echoed from the woods. Estate workers noted it but felt no concern. Hunting produced gunshots. Silence would have been stranger. No one responded. No one investigated. Time passed normally. At 11:15, the business associate emerged from the trees running. He shouted for help. His clothes were covered in dirt and pine needles. His face held an expression that servants later described as panic barely controlled. He said there had been an accident. He said the heir was dead. He said they needed the doctor immediately. The head gamekeeper and 3 workers grabbed a litter and followed him back into the woods. They traveled nearly 2 miles before reaching the body. The heir lay face down in a small clearing, his rifle 5 feet away, blood pooling beneath his chest. The shot had entered his back between the shoulder blades and exited through the sternum. Death appeared instantaneous. The business associate claimed the heir had been walking ahead, that his rifle discharged when he stumbled, that the bullet struck before anyone could react. The doctor arrived from town at 1 in the afternoon. He examined the body at the scene before allowing its removal. His notes recorded the wound trajectory, slightly downward, consistent with a shot from someone standing while the victim walked ahead. Powder burns suggested a distance of 10 to 15 feet, close but not point blank. No defensive wounds marked the hands. The victim had not seen the shot coming. The doctor ruled it accidental death pending coroner review. The coroner arrived the following morning. He worked part-time, splitting duties between death investigations and his private medical practice. He earned $300 annually from the county, far less than he made treating wealthy patients at estates like this one. The family's attorney attended the examination. So did the business associate's attorney. Both took notes. The coroner's report repeated the doctor's findings with minor additions. Time of death, approximately 9:30 based on body temperature and rigor mortis. Cause, massive trauma from rifle bullet. Manner, accident. The trajectory remained consistent with the associate's account. No evidence suggested intent. Hunting accidents occurred regularly. 1899 saw 47 documented hunting deaths in New York State alone. Rifles discharged from stumbles, dropped weapons, and mistaken targets. The coroner signed the certificate within 3 hours of beginning his examination. No formal investigation followed. The county sheriff reviewed the report and determined no crime had occurred. He did not interview witnesses beyond the business associate. He did not reconstruct the shooting. He did not examine the rifle for mechanical failure. The case closed the same day it opened. The body was released to the family for burial. Yet inconsistencies existed for those interested in finding them. The angle of the shot troubled a firearms expert consulted years later by a curious journalist. A stumble typically causes a rifle to discharge downward or upward, depending on how it falls. A horizontal shot into another person's back requires the weapon to be level and aimed. The expert noted this, but could not conclusively rule out accident. Improbable did not mean impossible. The distance also raised questions. 10 to 15 feet was close for 2 hunters who should have maintained wider spacing. Professional hunters kept at least 20 feet between themselves for safety. The men were experienced. They knew the rules. Why walk so near? The business associate explained they had been discussing a contract quietly, not wanting to disturb game. Plausible, unverifiable. Witness testimony would have clarified matters, but no other witnesses existed. The gamekeeper had not accompanied them. No servants worked that section of forest. The 2 men entered alone. One left alive. His account became the only account. The investigation that did not happen revealed as much as the death itself. Compare this case to a typical homicide investigation in 1899. When a factory worker was shot in Pittsburgh 3 months earlier, police interviewed 27 witnesses, examined the crime scene twice, and arrested a suspect within 48 hours. That case involved poor immigrants with no political connections. The trial lasted 6 days. The defendant received life imprisonment. When wealthy men died, procedure changed. A hunting accident in Newport involving a railroad executive's son saw similar treatment. The coroner ruled accident within hours. No one questioned it. Another case in Philadelphia. Another swift conclusion. The pattern held consistent. Wealth purchased assumption of innocence, and assumption of innocence purchased minimal investigation. Grand juries theoretically existed to check such assumptions. Any citizen could petition for a jury to review questionable deaths. The business associate's account could have been tested under oath. Inconsistencies explored, expert testimony heard. But grand juries required 16 to 23 members drawn from property holders. In this county, that meant farmers and businessmen who knew the family, who had sold them land or goods, who attended the same church. A jury of peers meant a jury predisposed to believe tragic accident over deliberate murder. No petition was filed. The legal fees alone would have exceeded $2,000, assuming an attorney could be found willing to challenge the family. Few existed. The best lawyers already worked for the estate. Those who remained lacked resources to sustain prolonged court battles. The case dissolved into the past like smoke in wind. The widow wore black silk at the funeral. She stood beside the casket, accepting condolences from 400 mourners. Newspapers printed respectful obituaries praising the deceased's business acumen and charitable donations. The shooting was mentioned as a tragic accident, nothing more. Society grieved appropriately and moved forward. The estate passed to the widow under terms of the will, $20 million and property holdings that stretched across 3 states. Within a week, the business associate departed for California. He sold his lumber company and left no forwarding address. Some called it respect for the widow's grief. Others noted the suspicious timing. Questions went unasked in public, but servants whispered. Groundskeepers who saw the body noted the shot placement. Maids overheard arguments from the night before the hunt, voices raised behind closed doors. The machinery of wealth had processed the death smoothly. Accident, closed, forgotten. But the forest retained the memory. Trees stood where men had fallen. Ground absorbed blood that told a story coroner reports would not. And in the mansion's 100 rooms, something had changed. The fortress now held ghosts. Whether those ghosts were paranormal or simply guilt made manifest, the result was the same. The house grew quieter. Parties became less frequent. The widow stopped accepting visitors, and servants reported cold drafts in hallways that should have been warm. Doors closed by themselves. Floorboards creaked under no visible weight. Some claimed the estate was haunted. Others suggested grief and imagination combined into false perception. The truth remained suspended between these possibilities, visible to neither side. But everyone agreed on one fact. After the hunting accident, no one saw. Nothing at the estate felt quite the same. And the story was only beginning. 3 more deaths would follow, each orbiting the same drawing rooms, each sealed with silence. The question was never who pulled the trigger. It was who paid to make it disappear. And that answer was still being written in ledgers the public would not see for decades. Chapter 5. Poison in the Silver Teacup. At precisely 4 in the afternoon, the air complained of a bitter taste and collapsed before dessert. The second death arrived 2 years later, in the spring of 1901. The setting was the estate's conservatory, a glass-enclosed room where afternoon tea had become a daily ritual. The widow had maintained this tradition after her husband's death, gathering family members and close friends for tea service at precisely 4 o'clock. The ritual provided structure to days that might otherwise dissolve into isolation. Porcelain cups, silver service, tiny sandwiches with crusts removed. Civilization measured in ceremony. On April 12, 6 people attended. The widow presided at the head of the table. Her late husband's younger brother sat to her right, now the family's senior male and heir, apparent to what remained of direct male lineage. A distant cousin, 2 daughters of a neighboring family, and the estate manager completed the gathering. Conversation centered on garden planning and an upcoming charity ball. Nothing remarkable preceded what followed. Their tea arrived in a Georgian silver service dating to 1750. The pot held Darjeeling imported from India at considerable expense. Each cup was poured by a maid who had served the family for 6 years. Sugar came from a crystal bowl, cream from a matching pitcher. The ritual unfolded with practiced precision, each movement choreographed through hundreds of previous afternoons. The heir's brother lifted his cup at 4:07. He sipped, paused, sipped again. His expression changed. He mentioned a bitter taste, unusual for this particular blend. The widow suggested perhaps the leaves had steeped too long. He took another sip, then set the cup down. Within 30 seconds, his breathing became labored. 60 seconds later, he clutched his stomach. 90 seconds after the first sip, he collapsed sideways in his chair. The estate manager caught him before he struck the floor. The man's face had gone gray. His lips showed a bluish tint. Vomit rose in his throat. His muscles spasmed involuntarily. The symptoms escalated with frightening speed. Someone screamed for the doctor. A servant ran to the stable for a horse. The conservatory dissolved into chaos as women backed away and men attempted to help. The family doctor lived 4 miles distant. He arrived in 23 minutes, a remarkable time given the roads and his horse's speed. The patient was unconscious by then, breathing shallow, pulse thready. The doctor administered stimulants and tried to induce additional vomiting. Nothing altered the progression. At 4:47, the heart stopped. Resuscitation attempts failed. The heir's brother was declared dead at 4:52, 45 minutes after lifting his teacup. Poisoning seemed obvious. The doctor suspected arsenic immediately based on symptoms and progression. Arsenic was common in 1800 households. Rat poison contained it. Ant powder used it. Fly paper soaked in arsenic water sat in most kitchens. Farmers stored it by the pound. Its availability was so widespread that proving intentional poisoning versus accidental ingestion became nearly impossible. The doctor requested an autopsy. The widow consented. The body was examined that evening by the same coroner who had handled the hunting accident. He opened the stomach and found it severely inflamed, consistent with corrosive poison. Tissue samples were preserved in alcohol for chemical analysis. The toxicology facilities in 1801 were primitive, but arsenic could be detected through the Marsh test, a procedure that had existed since 1836. Analysis took 2 weeks. Results came back positive. Significant arsenic content in stomach tissue, liver, and intestines. The amount exceeded any plausible accidental exposure. The coroner's report noted this, but stopped short of declaring homicide. The manner of death was listed as poisoning, undetermined circumstances. The investigation that followed exposed more questions than answers. Police interviewed everyone present at tea. All told identical stories. No one had touched the deceased's cup except the man himself. The maid who poured tea swore she added nothing beyond leaves and hot water. The sugar and cream were communal, shared by all attendees without ill effect. If the arsenic entered through the teacup, it affected only one person at a table of 6. The remaining tea in the pot was tested. No arsenic. The cup itself was examined. Residue suggested possible contamination, but the sample had been washed immediately after the collapse, destroying potential evidence. Whether this was panicked cleaning or deliberate destruction remained unknowable. The maid who performed the washing claimed she acted automatically, trying to help somehow, not understanding she might be destroying critical evidence. Arsenic has characteristics that made it the poison of choice for murderers throughout the 19th century. It is tasteless in small doses, though larger amounts produce the bitterness the victim reported. It dissolves in liquids. Symptoms can be delayed or immediate depending on dosage and stomach contents. Death appears to result from natural causes if the murderer uses patience and small doses over time. Acute poisoning, as occurred here, appears more dramatic but also more suspicious. The toxicology of 1801 was advancing but still limited. Doctors could detect arsenic post-mortem, but could not always determine the delivery method. Was it in the tea, the cup, the sugar? Did it enter through food earlier that day? The question spiraled outward without resolution. The victim had eaten breakfast and lunch normally with no ill effects. The acute nature of the poisoning suggested a large, concentrated dose delivered shortly before collapse. The tea remained the most likely vehicle. Motive became the investigation's focus. The deceased brother was heir to the widow's estate under the terms of her late husband's will. Upon her death, he would have inherited everything not already designated for the children. His death shifted inheritance to a more distant relative, a cousin twice removed currently living in Boston. This cousin had attended the estate only once in 5 years. He seemed an unlikely suspect, separated by geography and weak connection. The widow herself raised some suspicion among investigators, though they approached this carefully. She stood to maintain control of the estate without a male relative claiming patriarchal authority. Victorian inheritance law generally favored male heirs. A widow retained her late husband's property, but often faced pressure from male family members seeking to manage finances they considered too complex for female oversight. The brother's death eliminated that potential conflict. Yet evidence supporting this theory was absent. The widow appeared genuinely shocked by the death. Her finances showed no unusual expenditures suggesting poison purchase. Her relationship with the deceased had been cordial, with no documented conflicts. Suspicion alone was insufficient, especially suspicion directed at a grieving woman of impeccable social standing. The maid who poured tea faced the most scrutiny. She was young, in 23, and had access to all the tea service. But investigators found no motive connecting her to the victim. She was not mentioned in any wills. She had no romantic entanglement with him. Her family lived in the county and held no grudges against the estate. Background checks revealed nothing suspicious. She maintained composure during interviews, answering consistently. Without clear motive or evidence, the case against her evaporated. In scale paragraphs comparing poison investigations of the era revealed systemic limitations. In working-class neighborhoods, poisoning deaths were attributed to bad meat, contaminated water, or accidental exposure. Autopsies were rare, Investigations lasted days at most. When a factory worker's wife died after eating spoiled food, no toxicology tests were performed. The body was buried within 24 hours. Conversely, when poison touched the wealthy, resources mobilized. This case saw 2 weeks of chemical analysis, dozens of interviews, and consultation with toxicology experts from New York City. The investigation cost exceeded $3,000. That sum could have funded an entire year of police operations in a small town. The case remained officially open, but practically frozen. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. The grand jury reviewed evidence and declined to indict anyone. The coroner's final report used careful language: death by arsenic poisoning, circumstances undetermined, insufficient evidence to establish criminal intent. The legal system acknowledged something terrible had occurred, but could not or would not pursue it further. The second funeral was smaller than the first. Fewer than 100 mourners attended. The burial occurred quickly with minimal press coverage. And newspapers mentioned the death but framed it as a mysterious illness rather than suspected murder. The word poisoning appeared in only one article, buried on page 11 of a secondary publication. Servants talked more freely after the second death. Whispers became conversations. 2 deaths in 2 years, both unexplained, both touching the same family. Coincidence stretched credibility. Someone knew something. But proving knowledge and forcing testimony were different matters. To servants who spoke too openly found themselves dismissed. The code of silence reasserted itself through economic threat. Visitors to the estate decreased sharply. Invitations were declined with polite excuses. The social circle that had once celebrated the family's ascension now maintained cautious distance. No one wanted to attend a gathering where sudden death arrived between courses. The estate's reputation shifted from enviable to cursed. The widow closed the conservatory. She ordered the tea service melted down despite its historical value. The room where her brother-in-law had collapsed was locked and never used again. Through glass walls, plants continued growing untended, overtaking paths and benches. The space became a visible monument to something the family refused to discuss. But silence could not erase facts. 2 men had died in 2 years, one in the woods, one at tea. Both deaths defied simple explanation. Both investigations ended without resolution, and the machinery that protected the family's reputation was beginning to show strain. Money could buy delayed justice, but it could not buy forgotten death. The servants knew. The groundskeepers knew. Even the horses seemed uneasy in their stables, as if the entire estate had absorbed the knowledge that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. And there were still more deaths to come. Chapter 6. The Trial That Never Happened. The grand jury met for 3 days, to then quietly dissolved without issuing a single indictment. By 1903, pressure had built beyond casual dismissal. 2 deaths had become 3. A distant cousin visiting the estate in September. 1902 had fallen from a second-story window in circumstances that defied plausible accident. The fall occurred at night. No witnesses observed it. The window opened onto a flat roof, easily accessible without risk of falling unless pushed. The victim's skull fractured on flagstones below. Death was instantaneous. The county prosecutor, feeling heat from newspapers and whispered gossip, convened a grand jury to review all 3 deaths collectively. This was unusual. Grand juries typically examined single incidents. But the pattern had grown too obvious to ignore. 3 members of or connected to the same family dead within 4 years, none conclusively explained. The prosecutor presented evidence across 6 sessions spanning 3 days in January 1903. 23 jurors heard testimony from 47 witnesses. The coroner appeared twice. The family doctor testified for 6 hours. Servants described what they had seen and heard. The business associate from the hunting accident was subpoenaed, but claimed health concerns and sent a deposition from California instead. Forensic experts presented findings on the arsenic poisoning. Architects testified about the window from which the 3rd victim fell. The jury reviewed physical evidence: rifles, teacups, architectural drawings, financial documents. The cost of this proceeding exceeded $40,000. The prosecutor's office hired additional clerks to prepare documents. Expert witnesses commanded fees of $200 to $500 per appearance. Stenographers recorded every word. The courthouse required extra security to manage crowds and press attention. For 3 days, the case dominated local attention. The family's legal response dwarfed the prosecution's resources. 4 law firms representing various family interests coordinated their defense. Total legal fees exceeded $200,000, equivalent to 500 years of average working income. These attorneys did not merely respond to accusations. They shaped the narrative preemptively. Character witnesses appeared for the widow and remaining family members. 40 people testified to the family's charitable donations, church attendance, and moral character. A bishop spoke on their behalf. Business leaders praised their integrity. Each witness served to paint the deaths as tragic misfortune rather than criminal intent. The strategy aimed to make indictment seem like attacking virtue itself. The attorneys also emphasized investigative failures. No physical evidence definitively proved murder. The hunting rifle had no identifiable defects, but also no proof of intentional firing. The teacup's arsenic residue was suggestive, but not conclusive after washing. The window fall had no witnesses. Everything remained circumstantial. And circumstantial evidence, the defense argued, should not destroy respected families. Delay tactics extended proceedings. Defense attorneys filed motions to suppress evidence obtained without proper warrant. They challenged the coroner's qualifications to make toxicology determinations. They requested additional time to prepare rebuttals, forcing the jury to reconvene multiple times. Each delay cost money and tested public attention spans. The prosecutor's budget strained while defense resources remained essentially unlimited. The jury composition favored the defense by design. Of 23 jurors, 18 were property owners with assets exceeding $10,000. This threshold excluded most working men. The jury included a bank president, 3 merchants, 7 farmers who sold produce to the estate, a lawyer, and a minister whose church received annual donations from the family. These were not impartial arbiters. They were economic participants in the system that sustained the family's power. Deliberations occurred behind closed doors. No official record documented the internal debates. Years later, one juror admitted to a journalist that the room divided sharply. 8 members believed the deaths were suspicious enough to warrant trial. 15 argued the evidence remained too weak for indictment. The 15 included all the business owners and the minister. The 8 consisted of farmers and tradesmen with less direct connection to the family. Grand jury indictments typically require 12 of 23 votes, a simple majority. The prosecution fell 4 votes short. But even majority support might not have mattered. Defense attorneys had inserted a procedural requirement that indictments needed 16 votes for capital crimes, a higher threshold than normal. This provision was challenged, but upheld by the presiding judge, himself appointed with support from political leaders the family had funded. After 3 days of deliberation, the foreman announced no indictments would be issued. The evidence, while troubling, did not meet the standard required for trial. The jury thanked the prosecutor for his diligence and dissolved. The case was closed. Newspaper reactions split predictably. Publications dependent on advertising from family-controlled businesses praised the outcome as justice served. They emphasized the lack of concrete proof and the danger of destroying reputations based on speculation. Editorials spoke of tragic coincidence and the unfairness of suspicion falling on grieving people. Independent newspapers took harsher stances. A Syracuse paper ran a front-page editorial titled "Justice Deferred." A Brooklyn publication itemized the costs of the defense versus prosecution and asked whether wealth had purchased immunity. These articles sparked public debate but changed nothing legally. The grand jury had spoken. No higher authority existed to overrule it. The mechanics of influence revealed themselves most clearly in comparison. When a coal miner in Pennsylvania was accused of killing a supervisor during a labor dispute, his grand jury deliberated for 2 hours before indicting. He was tried within 3 weeks, convicted, and hanged within 3 months. Total legal proceedings cost the state less than $500. The defendant, unable to afford private counsel, received a public defender who met with him twice before trial. Contrast that with the estate case. 3 days of jury time, $40,000 in prosecution costs, $200,000 in defense spending, and no indictment. The miner had no political connections. The estate family had governors on their Christmas card list. The outcomes reflected those realities with mathematical precision. The strategy of hiring lawyers not to defend but to prevent charges from being filed proved devastatingly effective. By the time the grand jury convened, every competent attorney in the region had already been retained by the family for consultation. Conflict of interest rules prevented them from representing accusers. A working person hoping to pursue civil action found few lawyers available, and none with resources to challenge the family's legal army. The broader system reinforced these advantages at every level. Judges were appointed or elected, both processes requiring money. Campaign contributions flowed from wealthy families to candidates who understood the implicit bargain. A judge who ruled against elite interests too consistently found his next election challenged by a better-funded opponent. Or his appointment simply was not renewed. The judiciary existed within the same economic structure as everything else. The prosecutor who brought the case faced backlash within months. His funding was cut by the county legislature. His staff was reduced. When he ran for re-election 2 years later, he lost to a candidate backed by business interests. His career never recovered. The lesson was absorbed by every prosecutor in the state. Challenging the powerful had consequences. Justice was a luxury, affordable only when it aligned with power. The grand jury dissolution marked the end of formal legal proceedings. No further investigations would be launched. No new charges would be filed. The 3 deaths became historical curiosities, notorious but unresolved. The family had survived the greatest legal threat they would face. But survival came at a cost they had not anticipated. The trial that never happened had nonetheless occurred in the court of public opinion. And that trial was delivering a different verdict, one that money could delay but not indefinitely prevent. The fortress was holding, but cracks were spreading through its foundation. And outside the walls, a new force was gathering strength. The press, unshackled and hungry for truth that legal proceedings had failed to deliver. Chapter 7. When the newspapers turned hostile. A young investigative reporter decided the story was worth more than the advertising contracts. His name was Thomas Brennan, 26 years old, 3 years out of Columbia University, employed by the New York Herald at $40 per week. He was ambitious, idealistic, and convinced that journalism existed to reveal truth regardless of who preferred darkness. His editor had warned him about investigating prominent families. Advertising revenue mattered. Libel suits were expensive. Some stories were not worth pursuing. Brennan ignored all of it. He began research in March 1903, weeks after the grand jury dissolved. His initial focus was simple curiosity about how 3 deaths could occur without criminal charges. He requested court documents, coroner reports, and witness statements. Most were public record, though obtaining them required persistence. Clerks delayed his requests. Files were temporarily misplaced. When documents finally arrived, pages were missing. The obstruction was subtle but consistent. Brennan interviewed servants who had left the estate's employment. Domestic workers rotated regularly, and those no longer dependent on references spoke more freely. He pieced together details absent from official reports. Arguments overheard the night before the hunting accident, the maid's terror after the poisoning, the third victim's fear of heights making the window fall implausible. He traveled to California, attempting to interview the business associate from the hunting incident. The man refused to meet. Brennan sat outside his San Francisco home for 3 days. On the 4th day, the man's attorney appeared with a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if Brennan did not leave immediately. The desperation of that response suggested something worth hiding. His first article appeared in May 1903. The headline read, "3 Deaths, No Answers." The piece laid out the timeline without accusation, simply presenting facts and noting the absence of indictments. The article named no family members directly, but provided enough detail that anyone familiar with society news could identify the estate. Reaction was immediate. Within 24 hours, 3 major advertisers withdrew contracts from the Herald. Department stores controlled by family allies pulled their business. The total revenue loss exceeded $5,000 monthly. Brennan's editor was summoned to meet with the publisher. He returned ashen. The message was clear: stop or we close. But the article had already sparked something that pressure could not easily extinguish. Other newspapers picked up the story. The World, the Tribune, the Times, each ran their own versions. Some were sympathetic to the family, others more critical. The circulation boost from sensational content was undeniable. The Herald's sales increased by 12% the week Brennan's article ran. Readers wanted scandal more than they wanted comfortable silence. The rise of muckraking journalism had been building for years. Jacob Riis had documented slum conditions. Ida Tarbell was exposing Standard Oil's monopolistic practices. And Upton Sinclair would soon reveal meat-packing horrors. A new generation of journalists believed their profession served the public interest over business interests. They saw corruption as a story worth pursuing, even at financial cost. Brennan became part of this movement reluctantly at first, then with conviction. He published 6 more articles over 18 months, each digging deeper into the family's history. He documented labor disputes at their factories, where workers had been injured and received no compensation. He revealed political donations, followed by favorable legislation. He tracked property acquisitions where sellers later claimed coercion. The deaths remained his central focus, but he surrounded them with context demonstrating a pattern of wealth, immunizing the family from consequences. Legal challenges arrived predictably. The family filed 5 libel suits seeking a combined total of $1 million in damages. This strategy aimed to bankrupt the Herald and destroy Brennan personally. Defending libel suits cost between $10,000 and $50,000 each. Money newspapers had but preferred not to spend. Many publications would have settled and retracted. The Herald chose to fight. The trials became public spectacles. Brennan's attorneys argued truth was a complete defense against libel. They called witnesses, introduced documents, and cross-examined family representatives. The courtroom became the investigation the grand jury had refused to conduct. Testimony under oath revealed contradictions between official statements and private knowledge. A servant admitted seeing the business associate return from the hunt with the victim's rifle in his hands. Another described finding arsenic powder in a pantry where it had not previously been stored. In the window from which the third victim fell had a broken latch, unreported until Brennan's lawyers discovered it. The family won 3 libel suits and lost 2. The victories came in courts where judges had family connections. The losses occurred in venues without such ties. The pattern was obvious, but the damage to the family's reputation exceeded any monetary judgments. The trials kept the story alive for years. Every legal proceeding generated new articles. Public opinion shifted steadily towards suspicion. Circulation numbers told the economic story. Newspapers that covered the scandal aggressively saw readership climb 20 to 30%. Publications that remained deferential to wealth lost market share. The Herald's subscriber base grew from 40,000 to 65,000 during the period Brennan covered the estate story. Advertising revenue initially declined, but recovered as new businesses, less connected to old money families, filled the gap. The math was becoming clear. Scandal sold better than discretion. This shift represented a fundamental change in media economics. Previously, newspapers relied on wealthy advertisers and therefore protected wealthy subjects. But rising literacy rates and urban growth created mass markets. 10,000 working-class readers who each paid 3 cents for a paper generated more revenue than a single department store advertisement. Media was democratizing, and that democratization threatened elite control of narrative. The family attempted to counter this with their own media strategy. They hired publicists to place favorable stories, emphasizing charitable work and community contributions. They funded a rival newspaper that printed nothing but positive coverage. They bought silence where possible and manufactured counter-narratives where silence failed. But the tide had turned. For every favorable story, 3 critical ones appeared. The infrastructure of information control that had worked for decades was failing. Brennan received threats, both legal and physical. Anonymous letters warned him to stop. He was followed in the street. His apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen, a clear intimidation tactic. A man approached him outside the Herald office and suggested, with ominous politeness, that continued coverage would be unhealthy. Brennan reported all of it, making himself part of the story. Each threat became evidence of wealthy desperation. he was not alone. Other journalists joined the investigation. A reporter from Boston focused on the family's banking practices. A Philadelphia writer examined their labor relations. A Chicago paper investigated political corruption facilitated by their donations. The story expanded beyond 3 deaths to become an examination of how concentrated wealth operated beyond democratic accountability. The family's defense was undermined by their own success. Their prominence made them impossible to ignore. Their influence proved both their power and their vulnerability. They could buy judges, but not all newspapers. They could threaten reporters, but not the entire profession. The fortress walls that had protected them now made their actions more visible. Public lectures on the case began appearing. Reform organizations used the family as an example of Gilded Age excess and corruption. Ministers preached sermons about moral responsibility transcending wealth. The deaths became a parable, a teaching moment about justice deferred. The family was not convicted in legal terms, but they were convicted socially. The cumulative effect eroded their position in ways grand juries never could. Invitations stopped arriving. Business partnerships dissolved. Political candidates returned their donations, fearing association damage. The isolation was economic, social, and moral. The family remained wealthy, but wealth alone could not sustain their status. Brennan eventually won awards for his reporting. He published a book compiling his articles, which sold 30,000 copies. His career flourished while the family's reputation disintegrated. The inversion was complete. The powerless journalist had brought accountability that the powerful system could not. This transformation marked a turning point in American journalism and public life. The press had discovered it could challenge wealth successfully. The financial incentive aligned with democratic ideals. Readers rewarded courage, and courage became profitable. The model would spread, informing investigative journalism for the next century. The family learned what every powerful institution eventually learns. Walls keep out enemies, but also trap residents. And when the story escapes, when the narrative spreads beyond control, money becomes inadequate defense. So public attention was the one thing even $20 million could not purchase suppression of indefinitely. The newspapers had turned, and once turned, they never quite turned back. Chapter 8: Cracks Inside the Family Vault. The scandal did not begin in court, but in the family ledger. Financial records told a story more brutal than newspaper articles. Between 1903 and 1907, the family fortune contracted by 40%. Not from spending, though they maintained expensive lifestyles. The losses came from legal fees, withdrawn investments, and market conditions that crushed those already vulnerable. The legal battles cost nearly $300,000 across 4 years. Libel suits, grand jury preparations, private investigators, attorney retainers, witness payments, all accumulated into a financial hemorrhage. Each new article triggered another lawsuit. Each lawsuit generated more legal bills. The family was caught in a cycle where defense mechanisms consumed resources faster than investments generated them. The estate itself became an economic liability. Maintenance required $50,000 annually. Property taxes reached $12,000. Staff salaries totaled another $30,000. The house consumed $70,000 per year just to stand empty most of the time. No one wanted to live where death lingered. The widow resided in New York City. The distant relatives refused invitations. The mansion persisted as an expensive monument to catastrophe. Market forces amplified the damage. The Panic of 1907 struck with devastating force. Stock values collapsed. Banks failed. Railroads, the source of the family's original wealth, saw revenues plummet as industrial production declined. Securities that had generated reliable income suddenly yielded nothing. The family held significant railroad bonds now worth 60 cents on the dollar. Their banking investments faced similar losses. Wealth stored in supposedly safe instruments evaporated. The estate's value declined in parallel. Property assessments dropped by half. Land that had cost $6 million to develop would not sell for $3 million. The combination of scandal and economic depression created unsellable prestige. No one wanted a murder mansion during a financial crisis. The estate existed in a category beyond market logic, too expensive to maintain and too notorious to sell. Internal disputes worsened the situation. The widow controlled most assets under her late husband's will, but collateral relatives claimed they deserved larger shares. Lawsuits erupted between family branches. Cousins sued cousins. Trust fund disagreements landed in court. Each dispute exposed private financial details previously hidden. The family vault cracked open, and observers discovered less gold than expected. Letters preserved in private collections revealed the emotional deterioration. A nephew wrote to his sister in 1906, describing unbearable pressure. He detailed sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and the burden of being associated with a name now synonymous with scandal. He contemplated changing his surname to escape the connection. In other letters expressed similar desperation. Family members torn between loyalty to blood and desire to flee poisoned legacy. The widow's correspondence showed particular pain. She wrote to friends about isolation, canceled social engagements, and the impossibility of normal life. One letter described walking through empty mansion rooms, haunted not by ghosts, but by memory of what had been. She mentioned the conservatory specifically, locked and overgrown, invisible through glass walls as a monument to unspoken horror. Her wealth could not purchase peace or forgetfulness. Staff turnover accelerated. Servants left positions they would have kept for life. Employment at the estate became a mark of questionable judgment. References from the household carried less weight. Workers found better opportunities elsewhere, leaving the mansion perpetually understaffed. Those who remained did so from loyalty or lack of options, and not from pride in their workplace. Groundskeepers allowed portions of the property to return to wild growth. The 500-acre hunting preserve became genuinely wild as maintenance ceased. Paths disappeared under vegetation. The hunting lodge fell into disrepair, its roof leaking, windows broken by vandals. The estate contracted like a dying organism, unable to sustain its extremities. The financial strain forced choices previously unthinkable. In 1906, the widow sold a Manhattan property block for $700,000, half its 1900 value. She liquidated railroad stocks at significant loss. Art collections were auctioned discreetly. The process was managed quietly, but rumors spread. When the wealthy sell in a downturn, observers know desperation has arrived. A scale paragraph quantifying the decline revealed the magnitude. In 1898, the family fortune totaled approximately $28 million, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets. By 1907, that total had fallen to $17 million. $11 million, enough to build 20 similar estates, had dissolved in 9 years. Annual income from investments dropped from $800,000 to $400,000. Property tax bills remained constant while income halved. The mathematics forecast continued deterioration unless circumstances changed dramatically. Banking records showed mounting debt. The family borrowed against property equity to cover legal fees and maintenance. A $300,000 loan in 1905 grew to $500,000 by 1907 as interest compounded. The loan terms were unfavorable, reflecting lenders' perception of elevated risk. Banks that had once competed for the family's business now charged premium interest rates or refused loans entirely. The emotional toll exceeded financial damage. Family gatherings, once frequent and elaborate, ceased almost entirely. Holidays passed without celebration. Weddings became small private ceremonies. No one wanted public events that newspapers might cover. The family fractured into isolated individuals, each managing personal versions of collective catastrophe. Younger generation members faced unique burdens. Children who had grown up surrounded by wealth and status suddenly confronted social exile. Invitations to prestigious schools were withdrawn. Potential marriage prospects evaporated. Parents of eligible young people did not want their children associating with scandal. The social machinery that had elevated the family now ground them into isolation. One grandson, age 19 in 1906, and he wrote in his diary about contemplating suicide. The pressure, he wrote, exceeded his capacity to endure. He felt judged constantly, defined entirely by events he had not caused, and deaths he could not explain. His identity had been consumed by family history. The diary was discovered decades later, offering rare insight into psychological cost of inherited infamy. The widow attempted to salvage legacy through philanthropy. She donated $200,000 to hospitals and schools, in hoping generosity might redeem reputation. It did not work. Recipients accepted money gratefully, but still avoided personal association. Charity could not purchase absolution. The stain ran deeper than checkbooks could reach. By 1907, the family existed in a state of suspended collapse. Still wealthy by any reasonable standard, they nonetheless faced trajectory toward ruin. The estate represented the visible manifestation of this decline, magnificent but rotting, and grand but empty, a fortress become a prison. The breaking point approached not as a single catastrophic event, but as accumulated realization that the old position could never be recovered. Wealth remained, but everything wealth had purchased beyond physical goods had vanished. Status, respect, influence, social position, all dissolved despite millions in the bank. The machinery that had protected them failed not through legal defeat, but through social rejection. Courts had not convicted them. Society had, and society's verdict carried punishment more lasting than any judicial sentence. The fortress was crumbling not from external attack, but from internal decay, and everyone inside knew the walls would not hold much longer. Chapter 9. The verdict beyond the courtroom. No judge pronounced them guilty, yet society delivered a sentence all the same. The final public appearance occurred in 1908. A charity gala, ostensibly honoring philanthropic contributions, practically served as the family's last attempt at social rehabilitation. The widow had donated $50,000 to the organizing foundation, enough to guarantee prominent acknowledgement. She arrived at the Waldorf Astoria ballroom wearing black velvet and pearls worth $10,000. She was 63 years old, dignified, and utterly alone. The ballroom held 300 guests. Conversations quieted as she entered. Eyes tracked her movement to the assigned table. Then conversations resumed, but the widow sat in a pocket of silence. Those seated at her table engaged in polite minimum interaction. No one requested introduction. No one suggested future social engagements. She existed as a ghost among the living, visible but incorporeal. The evening speeches included obligatory thanks for her donation. Applause was measured, polite and brief. Other donors received standing ovations. Her acknowledgement lasted 12 seconds before the speaker moved to the next name. The difference was intentional and noted by everyone present. She departed before dessert, her carriage arriving to empty her from the building as quickly as dignity allowed. That night marked the last time she attended a major social event. Invitations continued arriving, but fewer each month. By 1909, they stopped entirely. The social exile was complete. A family that had once defined New York high society now could not secure dinner invitations from middle-tier participants. Marriage prospects for younger family members evaporated with finality. 3 unmarried nieces and nephews found themselves categorically excluded from eligible matches. When one niece became engaged to a banker's son in 1907, his family forced him to end the relationship or face disinheritance. The young man chose money over love. The niece never married. She lived to age 82, a spinster in a society that defined women by husbands and children. Business relationships dissolved with similar completeness. Corporate boards that once sought the family name as legitimizing presence now requested resignations. Partnership offers were withdrawn. Investment opportunities disappeared. The family name, once an asset generating access and advantage, became a liability. Businesses feared association would damage their own reputations. The taint spread through contact. Club memberships faced quiet cancellation. The Metropolitan Club did not formally expel anyone. They simply stopped processing dues and removed names from membership rosters. When questioned, administrators claimed clerical errors. But everyone understood. Other clubs followed suit. Within 2 years, the family held no memberships in organizations that had once competed for their participation. Political influence evaporated completely. Candidates returned donations or donated them to charity rather than accept money tainted by scandal. Politicians who had once courted the family's support now avoided even incidental contact. Photographs showing them together were excluded from newspapers at candidate request. The machinery of political patronage that had amplified the family's power reversed course. Former allies became strangers overnight. The estate sale became inevitable. In 1909, the widow accepted an offer of $2.8 million, less than half the original construction cost. The buyer was a hotel company planning to convert the property into a resort. They believed the scandal might actually attract tourists interested in notorious history. The mansion would become a curiosity, its infamy generating revenue where prestige no longer could. The sale process revealed how completely the property's character had changed. Appraisers valued it below comparable estates based solely on reputation damage. The scandal functioned as structural defect more serious than cracked foundation or faulty wiring. Some potential buyers withdrew offers after family members objected. Others lowered bids, citing difficulty securing financing when lenders heard the property name. The estate existed in a unique category. Aristocratic architecture rendered nearly worthless by narrative. The widow moved to a brownstone in Manhattan, with 3 stories and modest by previous standards. staff reduced to 3: a cook, a maid, and a driver. Her daily life contracted to a few rooms and minimal social contact. She attended church but sat in back pews, avoiding interaction. Former friends passed her on the street without acknowledgement. The social death was absolute. Younger family members scattered geographically. The nephew who had contemplated suicide moved to Texas, changed his surname, and started over in banking. Others relocated to Chicago, San Francisco, even Europe. Distance from New York meant distance from the story. In new cities, they could claim to be distant relations to the notorious family, connected by blood but not by scandal. Most succeeded in creating new identities. A few never escaped. The transformation was not limited to individual experiences. The family served as cautionary tale repeated in business schools, legal seminars, and reform advocacy. Progressive politicians used them as examples of Gilded Age excess demanding correction. Labor organizers pointed to them as evidence of wealthy immunity. The family became not people, but symbol, stripped of individual complexity and reduced to narrative function. This symbolic status represented the deepest form of punishment. They lost control of their own story. Newspaper articles, lectures, eventually academic papers, all defined them without input. They could not respond without generating new controversy. Silence became mandatory, but silence meant accepting whatever characterization others imposed. Some observers felt the social verdict was too harsh. 3 deaths, suspicious but never proven criminal, had resulted in complete destruction of a family's social position and partial destruction of their wealth. Due process had theoretically been followed. No court had convicted anyone, yet punishment arrived nonetheless, more severe than most criminal sentences. Life imprisonment with parole possibility seemed lenient compared to perpetual social exile, without possibility of redemption. Others argued the verdict was appropriate and overdue. Wealth had shielded the family from legal consequences. Society simply applied the accountability law had failed to deliver. If justice could not operate through courts, it operated through social sanction. The punishment fit the pattern of suspected crimes, even if specific guilt remained unproven. The debate reflected broader tensions about wealth, justice, and accountability in early 20th century America. Traditional deference to social elites was colliding with democratic principles and progressive reform. The family became a test case for whether wealth granted immunity or invited greater scrutiny. By 1910, the verdict was rendered in practical terms regardless of philosophical debates. The family existed in permanent exile from the society that had created and sustained their position. They retained wealth sufficient for comfortable living, but insufficient to purchase restoration of status. The mansion was sold, converted, and opened to paying tourists who wandered rooms once restricted to the elite. The social machinery that had protected them ultimately destroyed them more thoroughly than any criminal conviction could have achieved. A trial offers possibility of acquittal. Social condemnation offers nothing but permanence. No appeal process exists. No sentence reduction for good behavior. The verdict, once delivered, remains final. And in that finality lay the true power of social justice when legal justice fails. The question was no longer whether the family would recover. The question was whether anyone would remember them accurately, or whether they would exist only as parable, cautionary tale, stripped of human complexity. The climax had arrived not in a courtroom, but in empty ballrooms and disconnected telephone lines. The fortress had fallen without siege. The walls simply became irrelevant when no one cared to breach them anymore. Chapter 10. The mansion becomes a museum. Tour guides now recite the family history in rooms once sealed to servants and reporters alike. The conversion to museum occurred in stages across 3 decades. The hotel company that purchased the estate operated it as a resort from 1910 through 1925. Guests paid premium rates to sleep in rooms associated with suspicious deaths. The morbid appeal sustained operations through World War I and into the 1920s. But the Great Depression destroyed the luxury travel market. The hotel closed in 1932, and the estate sat vacant for 8 years. A historical preservation society acquired the property in 1940 for $400,000. By then, the original $6 million construction cost was historical footnote. The preservationists saw architectural value worth protecting, regardless of scandal. They raised funds through public donations and government grants, eventually accumulating enough to prevent demolition. Restoration began in 1947. Workers repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and stabilized the foundation. The interior required complete rehabilitation. Decades of neglect had damaged plasterwork, stained floors, and allowed water intrusion that rotted wood structural elements. The project cost $2.1 million across 12 years. It opened as a museum in 1959, 60 years after the first death. The museum curators faced immediate dilemmas about historical interpretation. Should they emphasize the architecture and social history while minimizing scandal? Or lean into the notorious reputation that actually drove visitor interest? Early exhibitions tried middle ground, presenting the family as typical Gilded Age industrialists who experienced tragic misfortunes. This approach satisfied no one. Visitor surveys conducted in 1962 revealed that 87% came specifically because of the deaths. Only 13% expressed primary interest in architecture or decorative arts. The numbers forced honest assessment. The scandal was the attraction. Ignoring it meant financial failure. The museum began incorporating death narratives more explicitly into tours. Current exhibitions balance architectural significance with frank discussion of suspicious circumstances. The Hunting Preserve features interpretive signs explaining late 19th century gun safety protocols and forensic limitations. The conservatory, restored but left empty of furniture, includes wall text describing the poisoning without declaring conclusions. The second-floor bedroom window from which the third victim fell now has a plaque noting the contradictions in official reports. Tour guides receive training in presenting multiple perspectives. They describe the family's charitable donations and business achievements alongside questions about the 3 deaths. The language is carefully neutral. Terms like alleged and suspected appear frequently. No guide states definitively that murders occurred, but none claim definitively they did not. The ambiguity reflects historical reality and maintains legal protection against defamation claims from distant family descendants. Annual visitor numbers average 65,000, generating $1.2 million in revenue. Ticket sales cover operating costs and partial maintenance. Government grants and private donations fund major restoration projects. The estate has become financially self-sustaining as a museum in ways it never was as a private home. The visitor demographic skews toward true crime enthusiasts, history buffs, and architecture students. School groups tour regularly, using the estate as case study in Gilded Age excess and progressive reform movements. Graduate students research archives housed in the former servants' quarters. The property serves educational purposes its original owners never imagined. Controversy persists regarding what the museum should emphasize. Descendants of the family, now numerous and scattered, occasionally object to exhibit content they consider defamatory. The Historical Society responds that public interest and educational value outweigh discomfort. Courts have consistently supported the museum's right to present historical record as documented in newspapers, court files, and archival materials. One exhibit particularly upsets family descendants, a display case showing newspaper front pages from 1903 through 1908 covering the scandal. Headlines scream accusations and innuendo. The display is titled "The Court of Public Opinion" and examines how journalism shaped perception when legal processes failed to deliver verdicts. Family members argue this exhibit perpetuates false narrative. Curators counter that newspapers themselves are historical artifacts worthy of study. The estate's transformation into a museum demonstrates how time reshapes meaning. What was once private fortress became public property. What was hidden became displayed. The mansion's purpose inverted completely. Built to project power and exclude outsiders, it now exists to educate visitors about the limits of that power. Romanticized narratives appear inevitably in museum interpretation. Gift shop postcards show the ballroom at its gilded peak without mentioning the widow's final, isolated charity appearance. Guidebook descriptions emphasize architectural details over social exile. The temptation exists to sanitize history into comfortable heritage. But the primary exhibits resist that temptation. They present the fortune, the machinery of influence, the suspicious deaths, and the family's collapse with appropriate complexity. Visitors leave understanding both the grandeur and the rot, the power and its limitations, the appearance and the reality beneath. Archived evidence sits in climate-controlled storage accessible to researchers. Court documents, personal letters, financial ledgers, all preserved for scholarly examination. The Historical Society commissioned a comprehensive study in 1976 that analyzed all available evidence regarding the three deaths. The published report concluded that reasonable suspicion existed for all three, but definitive proof existed for none. That ambiguity remains the estate's fundamental truth. Who controls memory? In this case, the answer has shifted across generations. The family controlled memory initially through wealth and influence, and newspapers challenged that control through investigation and publication. Social exile represented public control through reputation destruction. Now a non-profit historical society controls memory through curation and interpretation. Each shift changed the story's emphasis, while core facts remained constant. The estate stands as monument to multiple phenomena simultaneously: architectural achievement, industrial wealth, legal immunity, journalistic courage, progressive reform, and the complicated relationship between truth and proof. No single interpretation captures everything. The mansion, like the history it represents, resists simple categorization. Visitors walk the same halls where servants whispered about arguments and bodies. They stand in the woods where a railroad heir fell dead on a November morning. They peer through conservatory glass at overgrown plants that have outlived everyone involved in the original scandal. The experience is simultaneously educational and eerie, factual and atmospheric. The museum succeeds because it embraces rather than resolves this tension. It presents what is known, acknowledges what is unknown, and allows visitors to form their own conclusions. That approach honors both historical integrity and the genuine mystery that no amount of research has fully dispelled. The mansion became a museum not because anyone intended that transformation, but because no other viable future existed. Too notorious for private residence, too architecturally significant for demolition, it found purpose in its own history. The estate that once hid everything now displays everything, converting scandal into scholarship and infamy into insight. And the story continues evolving as new generations encounter it, each finding different lessons in the same rooms where power failed to protect itself from consequence. Chapter 11: Ghosts of Gilded Immunity. Some visitors claim they feel watched in the hunting gallery, though historians offer simpler explanations. The paranormal reputation began early. Within months of the first death, servants reported strange occurrences: footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening without human cause, cold spots in rooms that should have been heated. These accounts spread through the local community, transforming the estate from social landmark into allegedly haunted site. Skeptics attributed these experiences to psychological suggestion combined with the mansion's natural characteristics. Large old houses produce countless sounds as wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. Wind through tall ceilings creates drafts that feel like cold spots. Doors with worn hardware swing open from air pressure differentials. The architecture itself generates phenomena that frightened imaginations interpret as supernatural. But the accounts persisted across decades and changing inhabitants. Hotel guests in the 1920s reported identical experiences to servants from 1900. Museum visitors in the 21st century describe the same sensations. The consistency suggests something beyond mass hysteria, even if that something is purely architectural rather than paranormal. The hunting gallery, a long corridor displaying mounted trophy heads, generates the most consistent reports. Visitors describe feeling watched by something beyond the glass eyes of dead animals. The sensation is specific, a presence in peripheral vision that disappears when looked at directly. A weight of attention from nowhere identifiable. Some visitors leave the gallery quickly, visibly uncomfortable. Others feel nothing unusual. A paranormal investigation team visited in 1998 with electromagnetic field detectors, temperature sensors, and recording equipment. They documented several anomalies: a localized temperature drop of 8 degrees in the conservatory, unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations in the hunting gallery, and what they claimed was an electronic voice phenomenon saying "leave recorded" on digital audio. The Historical Society allowed the investigation but did not endorse its conclusions. Subsequent studies by skeptical researchers offered alternative explanations for each finding. The temperature drop occurred near windows with air leaks. The electromagnetic fluctuations correlated with electrical junction boxes in the walls. The alleged voice on recording was audio pareidolia, human brains finding patterns in random noise. Every supposedly paranormal event could be explained through environmental factors. Yet the feelings persist. Multiple visitors independently report identical sensations in identical locations without prior knowledge of others' experiences. The hunting gallery and conservatory rank highest for reported activity. These are also the locations most directly connected to violent death. Correlation is not causation, but the pattern invites questions. One theory suggests the mansion's size and acoustics create psychological effects. Studies of infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below human hearing range, show it can cause feelings of unease, dread, and sensation of presence. Large architectural spaces with specific proportions generate infrasound through wind interaction. The hunting gallery's dimensions match parameters known to produce such effects. Visitors experiencing unseen presence might actually be responding to vibrations their ears cannot consciously detect, but their bodies register as threat. Another explanation involves electromagnetic sensitivity. Some people report physical responses to electromagnetic fields, including anxiety and sensation of being watched. The estate's old wiring creates irregular electromagnetic patterns. Visitors sensitive to these fields might experience discomfort they interpret as haunting. The phenomenon is real, even if the interpretation is incorrect. The conservatory presents different challenges to skeptical explanation. Multiple visitors have reported smelling bitter almonds, a scent associated with cyanide compounds, in a room where no such chemicals exist. Olfactory hallucinations can result from stress, memory triggers, or suggestion. Learning that a poisoning occurred might unconsciously prompt smell sensations, but some visitors report the scent before learning the conservatory's history, complicating that explanation. Ghost photographs circulate online, showing alleged apparitions in mansion windows or shadows without sources in empty rooms. Photo analysis reveals most are artifacts of camera sensors, light reflections, or digital compression errors. A few remain genuinely puzzling, though puzzling does not equal paranormal. Unknown does not mean unknowable, just currently unexplained. The museum neither promotes nor dismisses paranormal claims. Staff are trained to acknowledge visitor experiences without validating supernatural interpretations. If someone reports feeling uncomfortable, a staff might mention architectural features that could explain sensations rather than suggesting ghosts. The approach respects both believers and skeptics while maintaining institutional credibility. Historical documentation reveals no eyewitness accounts of ghostly encounters during the family's residence. Servants mentioned unease, but not apparitions. The paranormal narrative developed after the deaths, not before, suggesting it emerged from knowledge of tragedy rather than independent supernatural phenomena. The timeline supports psychological rather than spiritual explanation. But human psychology and architecture interact in complex ways that resist simple dismissal. Spaces where violence occurred carry weight of history that sensitive individuals might perceive, even without supernatural mechanisms. Trauma imprints on places through cultural memory and collective consciousness. The estate embodies both physical structure and layered narrative, creating an environment where past and present feel compressed. The question becomes whether ghosts represent literal spirits or metaphorical hauntings. Is the estate haunted by the dead or by unresolved history? Do visitors sense actual presences or the weight of unanswered questions crystallized into architectural space? The distinction matters philosophically, but perhaps not experientially. The feeling of haunting produces real psychological effects, regardless of metaphysical reality. One visitor, a retired prosecutor, described walking through the hunting gallery and feeling overwhelming sadness mixed with anger. She knew the room's history before entering. She attributed her emotions to empathy and imagination rather than supernatural contact. But the experience was genuine and affecting. She stood crying among mounted deer heads, grieving for victims a century dead. Whether that counts as haunting depends on definition. The museum has embraced ambiguity as interpretive strategy. They offer evening tours with minimal lighting, allowing visitors to experience the mansion's atmosphere without explicit ghost hunting framing. Guides discuss historical events and let participants form their own conclusions about any sensations they experience. This approach satisfies multiple audiences. Believers find validation, skeptics find honesty, and historians appreciate refusal to sacrifice accuracy for entertainment. The paranormal reputation functions practically as a marketing tool. The estate's fame as a haunted location drives significant visitor numbers. Ghost hunting shows have filmed episodes there, generating publicity and revenue. The Historical Society benefits financially from the spooky reputation while maintaining scholarly integrity in exhibition content. Critics argue this compromises educational mission by encouraging superstition. Supporters counter that attracting visitors through any means allows broader educational impact once they arrive. Controversy will always exist when commerce intersects with history and both intersect with belief. What remains undeniable is the atmosphere. Walking through rooms where wealth failed to prevent tragedy creates genuine emotional response. The mansion feels heavy with accumulated story. Whether that heaviness is spiritual, psychological, or architectural becomes secondary to its existence and impact. The estate is haunted in the most important sense, by questions that remain unanswered, by justice that was never delivered, by a legacy that exceeds any single explanation. Those ghosts are real, regardless of whether they appear as apparitions or simply as persistent historical doubt. And doubt, once established, proves nearly impossible to dispel. It lingers in the rooms, the woods, and the conservatory, where life ended and truth remained forever obscured. That ambiguity sustains mystery while grounding it in verifiable evidence, the perfect balance for a story that refuses to die. Chapter 12. What Money Could Not Preserve. The fortune lasted 3 generations, but the silence did not. The family wealth persisted longer than their reputation. Descendants scattered across America maintained comfortable lives funded by trust funds and inherited investments. No one starved. No one faced poverty. The financial machinery established in the Gilded Age continued generating income through the 20th century, diminished but functional. But the silence that protected the original generation shattered completely. Archives opened. Newspapers were digitized. Historians researched freely without fear of libel suits from people long dead. The full story emerged piece by piece, documentary evidence revealing what court proceedings had hidden. In 1976, a Columbia University history professor published the first comprehensive academic study of the case. She accessed private letters, financial records, and sealed grand jury transcripts that had become available 75 years after the events. Her book concluded that evidence strongly suggested homicide in at least 2 of the 3 deaths, though proof remained insufficient for retroactive prosecution. The study won academic awards and renewed public interest in the scandal. Subsequent research by multiple historians reinforced and complicated the narrative. Some argued the widow was a victim of circumstance and misogyny, unfairly blamed because women who controlled wealth threatened gender norms. Others maintained the evidence pointed toward her as the most likely perpetrator in at least the poisoning. Consensus emerged that the business associate probably murdered the railroad heir during the hunt, possibly with encouragement from other family members. But consensus is not certainty, and certainty became unattainable across temporal distance. The estate murders, as they became known, despite never being legally classified as such, entered the canon of American historical mysteries. They appeared in documentaries, podcasts, and true crime television shows. By each new generation discovered the story and debated its interpretation. The family name, which had nearly faded from collective memory by mid-20th century, was resurrected and permanently associated with scandal. Living descendants faced complicated inheritance of this legacy. Most changed surnames or maintained distant connection to the family history, but genealogy websites and ancestry research made hiding increasingly difficult. By the 21st century, descendants found themselves contacted by researchers, reporters, and curiosity seekers. Some engaged with the history, others refused all discussion. The trauma extended across generations like a genetic inheritance more persistent than eye color. The contrast between past immunity and modern accountability revealed how much American justice had changed. The progressive reforms that began during the estate scandal's peak eventually produced lasting structural changes. Grand jury reforms made proceedings more transparent. Coroner systems were professionalized with medical requirements. Public defender offices gave poor defendants better representation. Campaign finance laws limited direct bribery, though influence persisted in subtler forms. Muckraking journalism evolved into investigative reporting with institutional support. Press freedom became more protected. Libel laws were refined to balance reputation protection against public interest. The reporters who exposed the estate scandal were precursors to modern journalists who investigate power regardless of consequences. Wealth still grants advantages in the legal system. Money buys better attorneys, faster bail, and more thorough defense. But the absolute immunity the Gilded Age provided has diminished. Wealthy defendants face charges and convictions impossible a century earlier. The machinery of influence still exists, but operates with greater difficulty under public scrutiny and improved oversight. The estate case served as an inflection point, demonstrating that concentrated wealth threatened democratic principles. Progressive era reforms targeting monopolies, corruption, and inequality drew partial inspiration from cases like this one where money appeared to purchase immunity from murder charges. The family's story became parable deployed in political arguments for decades. By the early 21st century, the estate had fully transformed into an educational site about historical inequality and justice evolution. New exhibits opened in 2010, examining parallel cases of wealth protecting suspected criminals. One display compares the estate deaths to modern white-collar crimes, where status and resources shield perpetrators from full accountability. The continuity between Gilded Age and present demonstrates progress alongside persistent challenges. Financial records eventually revealed the fortune's full trajectory. From $28 million in 1898, the family wealth declined to $8 million by 1940. Trust fund structures preserved capital through the Depression, but returns diminished across decades. By 20,000, remaining descendants had assets totaling approximately $3 million, incomfortable but no longer defining wealth. The fortune that once rivaled nations had contracted into upper-middle-class comfort, divided among dozens of people. The mansion as museum generated more economic value than it ever had as private residence. Annual revenue from tickets, gift shop, and event rentals exceeded what the estate cost to operate during the family's tenure. Converted to its opposite purpose, the property finally achieved sustainability. The fundamental question the story raises has no simple answer. If legacy is built on influence rather than truth, what eventually survives? The family constructed power through wealth. used that power to shape outcomes, and believed influence would protect both fortune and reputation permanently. But influence proved temporal. Truth proved more durable than power. Yet truth remained incomplete. No confession ever emerged. No smoking gun document proved guilt beyond doubt. The historical record contains evidence strongly suggesting murder, but not proof enabling conviction. The ambiguity itself became the legacy, more powerful than certain innocence or certain guilt would have been. The estate stands as monument to this ambiguity, to the limits of both justice and injustice. It reminds visitors that wealth can delay, but not permanently prevent accountability. That silence can be purchased, but not maintained forever. That fortresses meant to hide secrets eventually become museums displaying them. What money could not preserve was control. Control of narrative, control of reputation, control of memory. The family dominated their own story for a decade, then lost that control completely and permanently. Their version of events became footnote, while public suspicion became dominant narrative. This inversion represents the estate's true legacy. Power protects itself effectively in the short term, but systems evolve, values shift, archives open, and what seemed buried forever resurfaces when those who benefited from burial are no longer present to maintain it. The 3 deaths remain technically unsolved. No one was convicted, no one confessed. But the verdict of history is clear, even if imperfect. Wealth bent justice, influence shaped outcomes. And when that machinery failed under sustained scrutiny, the family collapsed into exile more complete than any prison sentence could impose. The question was never who pulled the trigger, it was who paid to make it disappear. And the answer, documented across ledgers, legal files, and newspaper archives, was the family itself. They paid with money initially. They paid with reputation ultimately. And they paid with legacy permanently. The fortune lasted 3 generations. The estate became a museum. And the silence, which they valued more than the millions themselves, is dissolved completely into history's endless conversation about power, justice, and the price of both. What survives is not the family as they wish to be remembered. What survives is the story of what they could not control. And in that survival lies a different kind of justice than courts could deliver, slower but more complete. The kind that comes when time itself becomes the jury and makes a verdict that no appeal can overturn. The mansion stands among its acres, beautiful and haunted, a testament to the truth that even $20 million cannot buy, that some silences end, that some walls fall, and that legacy built on buried truth eventually becomes truth about what was buried. And the woods remember, the rooms remember, the records remember. Everything that money could not preserve remains, transformed from secret into history, from silence into story, from power into parable. The fortress opened, the truth survived, and that, finally, is what endures.